And here we go. Up and running. Once again. Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T. Calkins-Treworgy, also known as Byron Sidious. And it's Sunday, so it is my Friday, since my work week is Wednesday through Sunday. And this is the fourth installment of Storytime Break Time. And I'm going to be continuing with the presentation, reading from A Midwestern Yankee in King Ovin's Court, which I wrote and was first published back in 2013. Now, yesterday we left off at the end of chapter 3, so we're going to be picking up right where we left off with chapter 4. Feels a little strange to be doing this presentation right now, given certain events in the United States today, just a few hours ago. But I remain steady, and I try to remain consistent. One moment. We answered it. Go ahead. Sorry about that, folks. Got some paperwork to tend to when I get back from break here. Jesus. So anyway, sorry about that. Let us proceed on with chapter 4 of A Midwestern Yankee in King Ovin's Court. The First Walk. Kathy turned and punched Daguerreau on the shoulder the moment she crossed through the rift. Not the wisest decision I've ever made, she thought, as she shook her bruised knuckles. She remembered the plate armor pauldron he wore only after the impact, at which he gave her an impish, almost demented smile. She looked away from him then, turning her attention to the phantasmal space that they stood in. She flinched at the sight of a swirling red mist covering the area as far as she could see in all directions. Kathy turned in a slow circle, taking in the in-between. She could just barely make out the trappings of her living room, but there was some kind of bluish grass growing up out of the carpeting that didn't react when she tried stepping on it. Rather, she passed right through it, like a ghost. It can be disconcerting at first, being in the in-between, Daguerreau said, stepping up beside her. We entered from the mortal plane, so the landscape we are presented with is predominantly going to match it, at least in this area, for us. What does that mean? Kathy asked, watching as sprays of blue energy flitted about what she thought must be her bedroom, roughly. It means the in-between is very different for everyone who passes into it. The landscape adapts to he or she whom enters. It is the same for only those who enter the same rift, or multiple rifts erected by the same source. You have never been to the in-between, so our landscape here reflects your uncertainty. Kathy marveled at the realm around them, approaching the door leading out of her apartment. She reached for the handle, but the door simply eased open before she could grab it. It opened onto the central courtyard of her building's property. What the hell? Cautiously, she stepped outside, into a grayish fog, turning around to look back in at Daguerreau. This isn't right, she said, hands and lower lip now trembling. There was no building. There was only the open door to her apartment, through which the Kenin knight now strode. He joined her and looked around. Actually, this is perfectly right. None of the other apartments are important to you. Well, except that one, he said, pointing to another freestanding door 15 yards away. Huh, that's the super, Mr. Gustafson, Kathy said with a warm grin. He's a nice old guy. Always fixes things whenever there's a problem. He invited me over for dinner a few times even. But it's not like he's, majorly important to me. Ah, but you must be important to him, Daguerreau said, looking with a sentimental grin at the super's door. The connection isn't one way, Miss Kathy. Never think it. Kathy took another look around through the fog, a dull ache settling in behind her left eye. Her hand went to her forehead involuntarily, rubbing. You are experiencing what is known as a kotami, the fatigue and aches that come from too much time in the in-between. At first, you won't be able to spend much time here. You should let me open the way from here to the ether plane now. By all means, she said. Daguerreau reached out his dog-like claws and swiped them through the air, creating a new rift. Where hers had been a jagged purple and blue vortex, his was a clean fold in the air, shining with an orange light. He walked through, and a minute later, Kathy followed after. The world she stepped into thrummed with vitality, with health, and with a subtle buzz that vibrated along the backs of her hands. The pain in her head subsided for a moment, flared bright again, and then vanished altogether. Kathy's body throbbed all over, dully, for almost a minute, but as she turned in a slow circle, taking in her surroundings in the ether plane, that discomfort, too, faded. The ether plane looked to her like the wild, wide-open plains of a nature preserve or national park. The beauty of the sweeping grasslands and vistas took her breath away, from the valley swooping down off to the left of her, to the rolling hills ahead and off to the right. A well-traveled dirt road stretched off toward the hills, a dozen yards to her right. The grass, she noted, was not all green. In fact, the field they stood in looked to be growing a kind of purple variety, with long, swooping blades of vegetation. Rather beautiful, isn't it? Daguerreau asked. Kathy, still holding the dagger and sheath apart, nodded. She then put the weapon away, the sheath clasped to her belt. That valley over yonder, to the west, is the valley of Gurbain. 300 years ago, the Gurbain clan of goblins attacked a peaceful clan of their own kind, called the Montos, who had established a rather large township there. They were loyal to King Ovin, and revered a man known as the Gaidling Goblin, one of the few powerful and benevolent goblins in this or any other kingdom in Aether. The Gurbain attacked unprovoked, slaughtering hundreds of Montos goblins before the Gaidling led a battalion of watchmen against them. The Gurbains unfortunately laid waste to the area and all of the town's structures. Their fallen were buried there, and surviving Montos moved out of the area. Wow. So the valley is named after the bad guys from that conflict? Enemies of the crown never see themselves as villains, Daguerreau said with some disgust in his tone. They were acting on the suggestions of the shade, Luga. He hitched up his bag on his shoulders a little and shook his head. Come, you undoubtedly have questions, Miss Kathy. I shall endeavor to answer them as best I may. The pair sauntered on to the dirt road, the Kenin knight taking a lead of 5 even paces, speaking clearly over his shoulder. So you have a monarchy here. How long has Ovin been king, and what kind of fairy is he? King Ovin is a fairy, Daguerreau said, spelling it out. Fairy. The most powerful magic wielder I have ever known. He has been king of Amherst for 4,000 years and more. Kathy gasped, at which Daguerreau chuckled. Many fairy are long-lived, Miss Kathy. I myself have served His Majesty for 704 of my 817 years of life. Well, you must take good care of yourself, Kathy commented. A lot of garlic? It's good for a silky coat. What? Nothing. Never mind, she said, rolling her eyes at his confused expression, half turned back toward her. So, will his son become king if he dies? Ammermit's kingdom isn't that kind of monarchy, said Daggero. Ammermit's is a democratic monarchy, in your terms. If and when King Ovin should perish, the High Council, comprised of one representative from each of the provinces, will hold a vote to choose the next ruler. While it is expected that they would select Prince Halfor to be king, yes, I have heard from the king's son himself that he has no desire to rule. So, if nominated, he will not run. If elected, he will not serve. Is it that sort of thing? Yes, precisely that, Daggero said, clearly pleasantly surprised by the quotation. Is that a common expression in your world? Yeah, but I don't remember where from, she said. Who chooses the representatives, though, and how long do they serve? Each councilman must be freely elected by the citizenry of their given province. They serve for 10 years, and then must run for election again to continue serving. Think of them like your country's senators, of which I have some vague familiarity. Oh, so they're a bunch of liars, backstabbers, and cheats in nice clothes with all sorts of side deals that they make in seedy bar rooms? Daggero snickered once again. In many cases, yes. There are 15 provinces, and thus 15 High Council members. Now, Miss Kathy, we are currently on a trade road which will take us to the capital in approximately 7 hours' time. If we should come upon any other travelers before getting there, you must let me do all speaking, unless you are asked a direct question. Even then, try to defer to me when you can. Newly awakened humans are often taken advantage of when they first arrive here. Do you understand? Yeah, I got it. We will be into those hills an hour from now, he said. You may have thought sooner, but your senses are not accustomed to the clean air of the aether plane. They continued on quietly for a few minutes before Kathy thought to ask her next question. Hey, did something happen to me when I passed through to this place? I only ask because I feel a little strange, tingly in some spots, and like I'm not the same as I was before. Some physical changes always accompany the awakened when they first cross over into the aether, he said, not looking back at her. Think of it as being branded or getting a tattoo. Well, what happened to me then? Daggero stomped in the road and twirled around, so fast that Kathy gasped. A squinting of his eyes told Kathy that he was weighing what he would tell her. He crossed his arms with one hand, stroking the underside of his snout. All right. There are streaks of gray along each side of your head now, he said. Kathy's hands flew up to her hair, grabbing tight. Also, I believe you'll find a new mark on your right forearm. Kathy pulled back the sleeve of her windbreaker, a lightweight dark blue number, and found some kind of alien script drawn in a highly Gothic script upon her arm. As she looked at it, the marking wavered and writhed like a snake. She pulled the sleeve down again, shook her head. Is this permanent? The hair, yes, Daggero said. The marking will only be visible here in the aether. Kathy groaned, then quickly knelt down at the side of the road. Daggero turned back a few moments later, calling out, What are you doing, Miss Kathy? I have to see this for myself, she said, rummaging through her backpack. She pulled out a can of Coke and a makeup compact, popping it open and angling the mirror. Sure enough, there was a single thin streak of gray hair along each side of her head. Damn it, I'm only 27, she rasped. I shouldn't have grays like this. She snapped the compact shut, tossed it in the bag, and stood up. Okay, let's go. Sorry about the pause there. Quite understandable. At least it's the same on both sides. Balance is everything. Okay, fair. A soft breeze blew around them, and the Kenyan threw one hand back in a warding gesture, splaying his feet in a wide stance. Kathy went deadly still with her coke to her lips, eyes wide as Daguerreau drew out his swords in a dual cross-draw. In his left hand, the blade of midnight black, seething with shadowy energy, radiating an aura of malice and corruption. In his right hand, a blade of purest white, giving off brilliant light and warmth, a sense of security and life. Boon and bane, the tiny foreign voice chimed in inside of her mind. Sacred and profane incarnate. Daguerreau swiftly bolted to the west, left of the road, 20 or so yards, standing at the ready. Something she couldn't see let out a piercing shriek, and as she watched, horrified, two enormous scorpions, mottled green and the size of large dogs, leaped out of tall purple grasses at him, stingers and claws, stabbing, swiping, pinching. Daguerreau moved like a blur of armor, cloak, and swords, and in less than a 5 count, the giant arachnids lay in bloody pieces on the lower grass. He shook off his blades, sheathed them, and stalked back over to Kathy. There was a strange orange light fading from his eyes as he reached her. What were those? She stammered. Mere specters, he said. The kingdom isn't exactly overrun with them, but specters are plentiful in the wilds. They take many forms, like yon scorpions. Are they evil? I mean, monsters? They are often aligned with the profane, yes, Daguerreau said. But not all are. Some specters are of sacred alignment, but they are no less of a threat. Let us proceed, he said, as though nothing had happened. Kathy shrugged herself free of her paralysis and followed him once again. I don't know why, but I sort of knew a little what you were saying there. What do you mean by aligned, though? Ah, yes. I had not thought I'd be the one teaching you of such things, but I did promise an answer to any questions that you had. He rubbed his throat again, a habit Kathy would come to recognize as meaning he really was deliberating over some thought or idea. Very well. In the aether plane, and in your world as well, all magic is divided into schools of power. The primary schools are air, water, life, earth, fire, and death, as you might expect. They are the primary schools of evocation, instantaneous magic, usually used in battle. Now, each of these schools is aligned with either sacred power or profane power. White magic and black magic, in other words? Kathy asked. You could use that analogy, I suppose, Daguerreau replied with a shrug. Air, water, and life magic are all sacred, aligned, whereas earth, fire, and death magic are profane, aligned. Most wielders focus heavily on one alignment, usually that which comes naturally to them. Some can only use powers of one alignment or the other, though they tend to enjoy a wider range of powers within their given schools of magic. But all things balance, as is right, Daguerreau said. Okay. Are there other schools of magic? Yes, though, as one might expect, they aren't as widely known or discussed. There is shadow, for instance, which involves a great deal of illusion. I rely on shadow when traveling in the mortal plane. Shadow is neither sacred nor profane. It simply is. That makes sense, Kathy said. She took a final chug of her soda and looked around helplessly for some place to dispose of it. Daguerreau? He paused, looked back at her. Where should I put this? It's aluminum, so you can just toss it off to the side of the road, he said. There is a breed of spectre here known as rendermen, creatures made entirely of living, moving metal. One will undoubtedly snatch it up as a little bit of a sweet treat. They eat metal? Yes, along with whatever animals they can get a hold of. Rabbits, deer, moose, elk, you name it. They'll even eat crabbit if they get close to a lake. And yes, crabbits are exactly what you might assume. A sort of crossbreed between a crab and a rabbit. Delicious meat, yes, but they can be aggressive. Daguerreau's tone was so matter-of-fact that Kathy found herself unable to even express surprise or incredulity. This was his world, after all. He had no reason to lie to her about it. She tossed the empty can to the side of the road, carrying on. I can get used to this, she thought. Thus concludes Chapter 4 of A Midwestern Yankee in King Ovin's Court. Go. Oop. And let's clear that too. I'm going to go ahead and call it a wrap there. Have one more smoke. Before I have to head back in to work. I did not have any total number of viewers creep above 1, so I'm just going to go ahead and assume that this was pretty much a solo read aloud. But for those of you who decide to pop back in later on down the road and give this a listen or watch, in order to keep up with the tale as presented, I thank you for checking in and for partaking of this bit of fiction. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I ask that you take care of yourselves, and as always, keep reading.